Do you believe in zombies? So in the last video that I made, it was basically covering who was Jesus, the life and the ministry of him. So we concluded that there really is no argument that Jesus wasn't crucified. It's pretty agreed upon amongst all historians that he was crucified. Now the discussion is whether he rose from the dead. Because if there's proof for his resurrection, then we can really believe that he really was God and that we should apply what he taught us. So the evidence for the resurrection of Jesus Christ is actually a pretty extensive case. I'm not going to go that in depth into it. I'm actually going to condense it down and make it a little bit more digestible. So I'm going to break it down to about 4 points of evidence for his resurrection. I'm also going to debunk some of the reasons that some people say that he didn't rise from the dead. So let's jump right in. A few days after Jesus' death, Christianity just absolutely exploded, right? So some of the secular historians or Jewish historians will say the reason why a lot of these Christians believed that Jesus rose from the dead was actually that the disciples stole the body of Jesus Christ and kind of made up a lie and told everyone that he rose from the dead. But we're going to debunk that by sharing that at the actual time after Jesus' death, the Jewish leaders who crucified Jesus were afraid that the disciples were going to steal the body. So they were already kind of thinking ahead of time. They're like, well, I remember when Jesus was alive and during his ministry, he was saying that he was going to rise from the dead. I bet you his disciples are going to try to steal his body and make up a lie. They already thought ahead of time. So what they did is they actually put a Roman guard in front of the tomb. Now, let's talk a little bit about the Roman guards. So the Roman guards took their jobs very seriously. They were also experts at war. There was no one in the land or area that could, overpower them or defeat them. Also, there would be no way to bribe the Roman soldier, because if a Roman failed at whatever job that they were given very harsh consequences. They had limbs chopped off, they were whipped in public squares and sometimes even executed, and even their families sometimes. So there's no way that this Roman soldier would give up the tomb or fail at his job to allow the Jewish people to steal the body. We know that the early Christians did not steal Jesus' body because of this. Now, the second point for proof of Jesus' resurrection is a pretty significant one. 3 days after his crucifixion, 500 plus eyewitnesses claim to have seen Jesus. And not just seen him, but also they ate with him and drank with him and had conversations with him. Now, this is very significant because not all 500 of these people were all Christians at the time. Some of them were non-believers. So that is a very interesting point, because they would have no reason to claim to have seen Jesus if they're already non-believers, unless they actually did. Now, a refute that some historians say, some Jewish and secular historians say, that all these people were just hallucinating, which is a very bold claim, because group hallucinations don't really happen. If you have a bunch of people in a room that are all tripping on LSD, they're all going to have individual trips. They're not sharing the same visions with each other. And even further past that, once they sober up, they'll recognize that what they've seen was a hallucination and no longer believe what they've seen. But all 500 of these people continue to go on to believe it and actually preach this to other people as well too. So the claim that it was a hallucination or they were tripping on mushrooms, it doesn't really hold any weight, doesn't really hold any ground. Also, like I mentioned before, the point that not all of these people that claim to have seen Jesus were believers. Some of these people were Jesus' own family. Jesus' brother James did not believe that Jesus was the Messiah until after the resurrection, which is very significant, because if Jesus had just died and didn't rise from the dead, there would be no reason to believe that he really was the Messiah. The third point that I want to make for proof of Jesus' resurrection is actually a huge fundamental point. That's the fact that the tomb was empty. And how do we know that the tomb was empty? Because the Jewish people of that time that crucified Jesus hated Jesus and hated all their following, so they wanted to destroy that following. So if they seen that there's an explosion of this faith in preaching Jesus' name, what's one thing that they could do to prove to everyone that it was a lie and Jesus is actually dead? They could just go to the tomb, roll away the stone, and present Jesus' body to people to show, nah, he's really dead and you guys are lying. So the fact that they didn't do that, present Jesus' body, shows that they went to the tomb to do exactly that, rolled away the stone, and did not find his body there. The tomb was empty. A point on top of that as well is that no Roman or Jewish history at that time denied the body from missing from the tomb. Actually, a Jewish historian by the name of Josephus, in his book, The Antiquity of the Jews, actually confirms that there was a stir in the community and that the body was missing, which is very interesting because if you are somebody who's trying to destroy an idealism or a belief system, you wouldn't confirm something that they believe in. That would only add to their faith. That kind of, for me, adds to the truth of Jesus' resurrection. So I know I said I was going to keep it short, so this is the last point that I'm going to make on the proof for Jesus' resurrection, but I would say this is the most fundamental one, so I'm really going to try to drive this one home with you guys. I know I've been talking a lot about history and things like that, but I want to appeal to you from a logical standpoint, okay? So at the time when Jesus was about to be crucified, his closest disciples, his 12 disciples at that time, 11 minus Judas, were so afraid of also being crucified or being persecuted that they actually dispersed and ran away and hid. So Jesus was all alone. So if anybody was going to believe in Jesus at that point, it was going to be his disciples. So when Jesus was put up on the cross, only John, his mother, and a few other people were there at the crucifixion. Everyone else was hiding and just fearing for their lives. So let's just pause for a minute and think logically about this. You know, if Jesus was just a man and he was put up on this cross and he no longer had any followers, there was no one there with him at that point, and if he were to die, the whole religion would just be over with. It'd just be done with. Like, there would be no explosion of belief in him, right? There had to be something that happened that caused all these Christians to suddenly just wake up from their fear of being persecuted and dying and being bold about their faith and going and preaching about their faith. The 12 disciples at the time of Jesus' resurrection went from being afraid to being willing to die for what they believe that they saw. And we already covered and we debunked the reasons of why that they would be lying about it. So we know that they did not steal his body, and we know that they weren't hallucinating. So that means that they really did see Jesus Christ. And that is why their faith was so secure, because, you know, even though Jesus' teachings and miracles were amazing before, that wasn't enough to make them believe. But him rising from the dead was reason for them to believe. Now I want to talk about the last point that some historians claim the reason why the Christians were creating this narrative or lying about it. They were basically saying that they were trying to gain fame and money and power, but that's the exact opposite of what these early Christians obtained. They actually were persecuted, hunted down by the Jewish people, imprisoned, beaten, sometimes executed, stripped from their families. All their goods were taken from them. They were heavily persecuted to the point of death. But all of the 11 disciples, minus John, were actually martyred for their faith. Some were crucified upside down, some were stoned. There's other ways the gruesome ways that they were executed for their faith, they went to that extent to preach the gospel. Now, if they were really just trying to gain fame and power and all this stuff, once they realized that they weren't gaining that and all they were getting is persecuted, they would have just said, "No, I was lying about all of that. That was all made up. We claim to seeing Jesus." No one goes to the grave over a lie. But yet, all these Christians, plus all the 11 disciples, did not renounce their faith. Not a single one of them. They all went to the grave believing wholeheartedly in what they had seen and believed. To add even further to that point, one of the heaviest persecutors of the early Christians was a man by the name of Saul, who was a Jewish Pharisee at the time. He was hunting down these Christians and imprisoning them, and was there at the stoning of Stephen, and he affirmed it. He was happy that these Christians were being persecuted. He thought he was doing the Lord's will, right? And he had everything that a man could ever want. He had power, he had fame, he had notoriety, but yet he also was converted to Christianity because he was one of those people who had claimed to had seen Jesus rise from the dead. So he gave up everything and became nothing for the gospel. He converted to Christianity and actually became one of the greatest apostles to ever live and wrote a majority of the New Testament. This is astounding. This is amazing. Like, why would he give up all that to become persecuted as well? And if you read through the epistles and you read through the things that Paul wrote, he was actually also persecuted too. He was beaten, he was stoned, he was shipwrecked, he was even like close to death and got revived. And this was all for the sake of the gospel. He lost everything for this and eventually was killed for his faith. This does not make sense unless that there was something significant to believe in this cause. This wasn't just a white lie that somebody made up to push some type of agenda. There was nothing to gain, everything to lose, unless eternal life was really true that Jesus claimed. There was a Roman emperor by the name of Nero who led the most heavy Christian persecution in Christian history. He burnt down his own city and blamed it on the Christians so he could further his hate towards them and persecute them. So a few of the gruesome things that he would do is he would round up Christian families and he would fill the Colosseum with Roman citizens, and he would have these Christians executed in gruesome ways. He would release lions and the lions would devour these families while these Romans would cheer, just because the fact that these people were proclaiming Jesus' resurrection. Now there's nothing to gain for these families to lie about that, to get eaten by lions for what? A lie? Furthermore than that, Nero would actually impale Christians on poles, cover them in oil and light them on fire, and use them as lamps at some of the parties that he would throw. So during that time, it was not cool to be a Christian. It did not give you notoriety. It did not give you fame. The only thing it gave you was death. Like, there's no reason to believe in it unless it's actually true. To me, that builds my faith as well too, because even if you look at today's age right now, it's not really cool to be a Christian. Now, I know that we're not getting persecuted as heavily as these early Christians were. We're not getting fed to lions or anything like that. But as a Christian, you do get a lot of pushback from society. There's nothing to gain earthly to be a Christian. There's only things to lose earthly. But the reason why myself and other Christians are willing to give up all these other things and to endure certain types of persecution is because we truly believe that Jesus was the Son of God and did rise from the dead, and by believing in him, we can be with him forever. That's something worth dying for. So that's my conclusion here. I hope I made a few good points for you guys to consider. And if you haven't already, like and subscribe my channel, because I'm going to be posting some more other good content. And if you guys have some suggestions of videos that I should do, you can leave it in the comments, or you can text it to me or call it to me if you know me. But I appreciate you guys for listening. And again, God bless you guys. And remember to always love your neighbor.